All right, so here's Rudy. All right. Well, for the remote people, the remote sites, you can pull out your rubric, your writing rubric now. And those of us in the room, you should have got a folder off the table over there. They're color coded by language, so you should have a folder for your language. What you'll find in it is a handout for today, which has the cover page has some important info for today and then future. And then behind that, there are the rubrics that we use today. The next thing that's in there is the writing and the use. So let's take a quick look through PowerPoint. Just a quick look at major levels and sub-levels, and then we'll look at the writing. And whoever, if you're remote, I want you, if you are at a remote site, I want you to mute your mic. Okay? Hear you. Yeah, Brent. And then we're going to do an inter-rater reliability here. We meant our rating through a Google form. Finally, we will be the things. Okay, but for your viewing, we won't be able to see the results today. All right, so proficiency guidelines. These are published by Axel, 12, publication, and we're talking about the major levels here. Do we know what they are? What's the bottom level? Okay, we said, well, you're talking about major levels. Novice is the major level, okay? And above that, intermediate and advanced, and on top of advanced, superior. And it's in the form of an inverted pyramid. That's the icon. It's representative of the fact that as you move up this scale, it takes a lot longer to fill it up. Okay, so you can move through novice in a matter of months or even weeks, depending on how earnest you are. And as you go, it takes longer. So that's why there's an inverted pyramid. At the very top is distinguished, and we don't really bother with that. Axel doesn't even test for distinguished, although there's a description of what that is. Now the sub-levels, what are those? Low, medium, and high. All right. And the sub-levels pertain to which major levels? The first three. If you said the first three, correct. Okay. There's no sub-levels in superior. So in other words, you don't say superior, low, mid, high. It's just superior is superior. And there's a lot of variations in superior. Once you cross that boundary, I mean, I can be superior. Someone who has way more experience and speaks way better than me can also be superior, and yet not distinguished. Anyway, those are the major levels. Now, we want to keep returning to these three what we call pillars. These are all important when it comes to understanding the rubric and using the rubric and finding, having it function how we want it to function. And that, y'all hear me? Sounds like it's louder now. First of all, our rubric and all of our test instruments have to be accurate. That is, they have to be true to the actual standard. Okay, otherwise we're off base. Second, they have to be reliable, and that has to do with how we use them. Okay, if we're all using the rubric and interpreting it the same way, then we'll get reliable ratings. Our ratings will be, for the given sample, they'll all be close to each other, if not identical. And that's really what we have to have in order to say that our assessment is valid. Okay. And thirdly, it has to be practical. So we can make a great instrument, we can have a great assessment, and then it takes the teacher 3 years to grade it and 5 years to administer it and so forth. But we're not looking for that. It needs to be practical. It needs to be something that's usable for the classroom, for secondary teachers. Okay. So those three pillars, we always check back to them. When we do revisions, you can see we're on version 6.3 of the writing rubric. Any revision we do has to be justified in terms of those pillars. Or it's not going to work. Okay. So here's the writing rubric. Everybody, this is the latest one. This is the latest one. At the top it says 6.3. If you go to the distribution folder, on the cover page of your handout, there's some URLs there, and the distribution folder with all these rubrics and so forth is listed there. So anyway, this is the latest one. And the recent addition was this, well, we'll get to it. At the top, if you're not familiar with it, it's a continuum from novice low all the way up to advanced mid. And there are 5 domains: level of discourse, function, language structures, vocabulary, and comprehensibility. Um, and for, if we want to know what does it mean to be a novice low, well, here it is. In that column, novice low, that's what it means to write at the novice low level. Those descriptors right there should be enough to take any language sample and chart it on this continuum. It falls here because it matches this description, or it falls at the next level because it matches that description. So that's what rating is. What we do is look at the sample, find evidence in the sample of these descriptors, and that's the rating. So in theory, it's really straightforward, right? All right, I think that's all that we had to say about this sample, or this rubric. Oh, these two arrows pointing to the vocabulary and comprehensibility domains. Those are the ones that have been adjusted most recently. Even those who participate in summer curriculum development will see that the comprehensibility domain is broken down into different sections, where before it was just checkboxes. The way comprehensibility works, I'll just say really quickly. In the first box all the way to the left, under novice low, there's a description there. And that's kind of a standalone description. If the writing matches that description for comprehensibility, there you have your rating. Now the next three boxes for novice mid up to intermediate low, you're looking at the sentence level. Okay? If the writing does not get beyond the sentence level, we ask how comprehensible are the sentences. All right? So you have to know the level of discourse. You have to know if you're dealing with sentences or paragraphs, or something less than sentences, which is the novice low level. So I'll just restate that. Once we have the top domain identified, if we know that we're dealing with sentences, then we're going to be looking at those boxes that are shaded lightest gray on the comprehensibility domain. And those are all, if you read it down there, they all refer to sentences. And the question is, how clear is the message within the sentences themselves? So this writer has not developed their skill enough to combine sentences and produce a message that's more than just a standalone sentence. Maybe a lot of sentences, and they may be kind of related by theme, but there's no real message that's being conveyed by all the sentences together. Right? Now the next three boxes, from the intermediate mid to the advanced low level in that domain of comprehensibility, have to do with paragraphs. If we have identified the level of discourse as being at the paragraph level, in other words, this writing sample that we have has real paragraphs in it, then the question is, how clear are those paragraphs? Because how comprehensible are they? And I think the verbiage there in the rubric is in terms of how easy they are to comprehend. So we know what it's like when a student turns in a paragraph, right? And we know that there's a common theme there for the paragraph, and maybe a couple sentences, it seems, well, we read through the whole paragraph, and at the end, as we go through, all the sentences make sense, right? And they seem to be talking about the same thing, but at the end, we're like, okay, so what was the message there? It's kind of confusing to us to figure out what the whole message was, right? Even though as reading through it, all the sentences are great, and they may relate to the same thing. We get to the end and we still can't figure out, well, what's the overall message of this paragraph? I can't really summarize it. Then that's an example of a paragraph that's hard to comprehend. Okay. We've also seen writings where there's a paragraph, when we read through it, it's very well structured, there's a topic to it, there's supporting evidence, and it's very clear. We finish reading it, and just like in a snap, we can tell you this paragraph talks about X. It's very clear. That's a well put together paragraph. So that's on the higher end of those three boxes. They're probably towards advanced low, because that paragraph can be summarized and is very concise and has a definite message beyond just the individual sentences. So, risky business to say, are there any questions right now? But I'm asking, are there any questions, Jonathan?
Can Latin actually be dismissed now because we're going to
Latin may be dismissed. Thank you, Latin. Any other questions about this domain on the bottom? Go ahead, Hannah.
After we have the domain on the bottom, what's the Shading? How does the shading?
So if you, well, most people didn't hear. I'm going to keep going, even though Lass is walking out. It's a great question. Anna asked, what does the shading indicate here? There is a meaning to the shading. And the shading is uniform except for comprehensibility. Okay? The shading above the comprehensibility domain, all that does is catch your eye and tell you that you're dealing with a major level. Okay? So other than the comprehensibility domain, it just indicates the major level you're dealing with, whether that's novice, intermediate, or advanced. In the comprehensibility domain, it directs your mind towards the level of discourse that you've identified. Okay, whether that's sentence level, paragraph level, or the lowest or highest of those boxes on the bottom. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, I think we've said enough about the rubric. It's familiar to a lot of us, maybe new to some, but we're going to rate the sample right now using the rubric. Yeah. Okay, one more thing, jumping ahead. On the other side, see that handy little arrow? You flip it over. On the other side is the rest of the rubric. Okay, the glossary is actually part of the rubric. All right. And I have up here on the PowerPoint just one of the domains. I think it's level of discourse. That's an example of one of the domains there. So when we come across those bolded terms in the rubric, and we want to know, well, what does it mean to be what is a paragraph? What is a sentence? What is X, Y, Z on the rubric? All those bolded terms on the front of the rubric are defined on the back. And we're aiming to define them in a way that increases our reliability. That helps us interpret the rubric the same across the board. Okay, so these are kind of the canonical definitions of those terms. And the definitions can change if we feel like, if we get feedback that, the definition for multi-paragraph discourse that's like, doesn't make sense or whatever, then we can change it and adjust it. That's why there's a comments and suggestion box for particular things like that. Anyway, so now we're going to rate a sample.
Okay, so what we're going to do is ask you if you have your devices, you have your laptop, you have your smartphone, to go ahead and log in and go to this particular site. And then I'm going to come back and give you further instructions. So
this will be to submit when they're done.
Okay, sorry. All right, so you actually have the writing sample in your folder, apologies, and you also have the rubric. So what you're going to do is independently, that means you're not talking to your neighbor at all, at least for now, okay? And you're going to independently rate the sample that you have using the rubric that Rudy just reviewed with you. So we're going to give you several moments to do that. And once you have actually concluded as to what you would like to rate that particular sample, then you're going to use your laptop or smartphone to go to this particular site, and you're going to submit your rating. So that way we can capture everyone's rating in one place, and we'll be able to share that information with you later on. So what questions might you have? Yes, sir.
Really isn't for everybody, but I'm a Chinese teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and when they don't use the characters and they use pinyin.
They use pinyin. Yes, I think you should probably have a.
Let's have them rate it independently, and then they can discuss it after.
Okay, let's do it that way. So that way you can actually have some round robin contact to discuss it as to why you came to that rating. But that's a very good question.
The next step is that we're going to do round robin sharing. So don't collaborate on your ratings right now. Okay, really important to just have your own thoughts in the initial rating. It's actually better for iterative reliability if you're individual the first time around.
As you're rating your sample, you're submitting your ratings, you may want to use the rubric to actually indicate the varying levels, performance levels that you actually allocated for each of the levels of discourse, so the different functions on the left-hand side. Okay.
Okay, we're gonna bring it back together. There's been a lot of good discussion, I think. My group, good discussion, so. This works sometimes. We're gonna bring it back together. Those of you at the remote sites, you can't see us, but we're all raising our hands. You should raise your hands too for attention. Anyway, we're back together now. 2 or 3 people to share an insight. Go ahead, raise a hand. There are a couple people that want to share an insight, an aha that you had, something you hadn't considered before. It is all old news to everybody. Oh, okay, yes. Nice and loud.
Yeah, we just keep having a hard time when we have one section, language structure, intermediate level. We find that the structure is inconsistent, but it is not in full structural structure. So often enough, we hit a point where we say the first part of that little state applies, and the second doesn't. And then also, if you go lower, we still did the same problem. So what we do then? Do we go to the lower level?
So the question was, within one box on the rubric, some things may apply, but other things just definitely don't apply.
Yeah, but you don't find the perfect box.
So there's no one, for some, in some cases, there's no one perfect box. Okay, so 2 things that I'll throw in, and then there are a couple of follow-on comments. But for one, even ACTFL says that if there is a tie or if there's an indecision point, then we go with a lower rating. Okay, that's ACTFL standard. It may just be, though, the case that our rubric isn't refined enough yet. And so that's why there's a feedback after each integrated reliability. You can provide that feedback. There's also the Q&A drop box. Put that in there, be specific. We give you feedback about the rubric, about this particular thing. And that's going to help us refine it, because ideally we want it to be as kind of categorical or whatever, as clear as possible, applicable to whatever we're looking at. So that's a great comment. And there was a follow-up comment too. Do you want to come up to the mic? So people, yeah. So, no, okay. Yeah, so the comment was that it seemed to be in between 2 of the descriptions. So if we find that, it would be helpful to know that that's what you see, and then why, like an excerpt of the sample that you're looking at that would make it that way for you, or makes you see it that way. That would be helpful to kind of iron that out and tease it out a little bit more. And then one more, and we'll move on. Right. Do you want to come up? I'm asking you to come to the mic so people offside can hear. They can't. The laptop mic isn't very loud.
Sure. Hello. The problem that we have is knowing how many years of language did the student has in order to help us to grade the paper. So we had a problem with that.
That's a great comment, and that's one that is frequently voiced. The way it's supposed to work is we can use the rubric to rate any sample that we come across. You could find some letter written online, you don't know who in the world wrote it, you can use the rubric to rate it. For the speaking rubric, you could be in conversation with anybody at the grocery store, you can rate the conversation. The grocery store. Here's a rating, hand it to me. Or just keep it in the back of your mind. But it really is supposed to be independent of the prompt. And so, in some cases, I think that's a mind shift that we have to work into, something that we have to become comfortable with. And, there may be reasons why that persists. And so if you find yourself with that feeling, like needing to know what the prompt was in order to use the rubric, then that would be great feedback. Put it in the comment box, explain this is what is happening when I do the ratings, and this is why. Because I think that will help us to understand that better and maybe provide some explanations or some particular practices that will help with that. So one more comment seems like it's related, or two more.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So what you're saying is the person away our level of bias, as in if like a level 2 student is like trying at level 3, we're not like more like, oh my gosh. But yet if level 3 students doing that same thing, their grades are different because we have that bias level.
So what Rhoda was saying, okay, Rhoda was saying that the rubric should remove the level bias. Right? We shouldn't have that bias of confining the students. You were way more eloquent than me. You should come up here. Was that what you were clarifying? Okay, and then 5.
I think we had two different interpretations of current topic, as in current as in what students were currently studying versus current as in current events. And so I think that the way it's worded is confusing. Like
Right.
Issues, it's
Yeah.
current issues.
Did the glossary provide any clarity? Okay, so I believe that what you're referring to, that was current topics. Is that current topics in the classroom, or is that current topics in the world? And I think that it's trying to say current event topics.
Right, I think
The
it's
world.
the current issues.
Current issues.
Topics.
So
There's no
that's,
glossary for vocabulary.
oh, there's no glossary for vocabulary. Oh, well, there we go. Anybody want to volunteer to write it up and just email it? We're waiting. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the speaking now. And we're going to follow a similar pattern to what we just did with the writing. And that we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we're going to rate the speaking sample. All right? So we'll look at the speaking rubric. Oh, we're going to do a practice rating with a speaking rubric. Then we're going to watch a model of an interview. And we're going to look at the speaking prompt. And then we're going to practice administering the speaking assessment. That's a tall order for the time that we have left. So we'll try to move fairly quickly here. So this is the speaking rubric. It's laid out, with boxes. But if you look carefully at it, it's not on. The axes aren't the same. In other words, we have the domains on the top and the levels on the left, which is the opposite of the writing rubric. The reason it's laid out like this is because it's on the fly, working with a student. It's much easier to rate them this way because it matches the prompt or the elicitation guide. So that was one of the motivators to change swap those axes. Anyway, we have the major levels on the left here: advanced, intermediate, and novice. And there's an icon associated with each one. The advanced level is that reporter who can just go on and on and on. They're the primary speaker. The intermediate level, there's a linguistic survivor. They can get by, right? They can defend themselves. They can handle very basic situations, and they can communicate back and forth, but they're not the dominant speaker. And then at the novice level, they're very dependent on the other speaker to continue the conversation. That if it were up to them, the conversation would end. They just don't have the skills to perpetuate the conversation. So they can parrot things back, and they can recite things that they've memorized. And then function, level of discourse, those two appear first there. And the descriptions have been reduced from what you see on the writing rubric. I'll just point out that the very top items, discuss abstractly under function, and multi-paragraph discourse under level of discourse, those are actually superior level functions. Then we have interaction and fluency, and that has to do with how active the student is in the conversation and how much the continuation of the conversation, that cycle of conversation, is in their hands. Are they able to lead the conversation? Are they able to maintain it and keep it going? And then vocabulary has to do with the topics that they're able to discuss. If the student can only talk about their preferences, very close to home, very close to their own personal self, that's at the bottom of the scale. And then as we move up the scale, it gets further from the student. They're able to talk about things in their school or things that they're doing around the school. They're able to talk about their community. And then it broadens out from there. So that's the vocabulary that they can use. It's easier for them to talk about self because that's what they get most practice with and are most familiar with. And they have to develop the rest of the vocabulary consciously over time. It takes time to move away from the self. That's how vocabulary is organized. Time frame is present for intermediate and novice, and then at the advanced level, we have some control of aspect, which would include the conditional and the distinction between, for example, in Spanish, the imperfect and preterite. So things that have to do with verb usage that aren't specifically indicators of past, present, future distinction. Okay, and then they can also communicate in major time frames, past, present, and future. And then the role play, there's no role play for novice, but at the intermediate level, they have to be able to, at the intermediate level, I don't want to say they have to, but at the intermediate level, we see the speakers able to handle uncomplicated, straightforward situations like ordering pizza or, something like that. Very, very simple transaction. Or asking simple questions. They can form questions. They can say, how much does that cost? Where do I go? What time? And that sort of thing. At the advanced level, they can handle a situation with an unexpected complication, like they, crashed their parents' car, or, they lost something, or got pulled over by a cop, I don't know, for dealing with older students. An unexpected complication that they have to work out. That's much more difficult linguistically to deal with. And they can ask questions to go beyond just the details at hand. And then the ratings over here, we'll talk about those in a second. So let's say that with these yellow here, we interview a student and we use a highlighter or whatever, and we highlight these yellow portions here because that's what we see them doing. That would correspond to an intermediate low rating because they maintain the intermediate level the whole time. There's a flat line through intermediate low. Okay, if we saw this type of pattern here, they peaked up in vocabulary and time frame in the advanced range. So their rating would be intermediate mid, and the little graphic there shows the peaks under the rating section. And then here, most of the time they've been at intermediate, but really they couldn't get away from the self. Okay, they can only talk about themselves. We pushed them to talk about other things, and they just couldn't. They didn't have vocab developed for anything other than their own, preferences and the things that deal with themselves. So they would score novice high, and you see the little graphic there where there's the flat line has those two dips that go down, and it looks like a plateau. Okay, so that's how the rubric looks and how the rating is derived. And that's really all there is to say before we rate a common sample. Any clarifying questions that you want to throw out before we rate? Yes, Catherine?
Highlight the yellow.
Okay. So if we interview the student and this is what we see, that all the evidence that we have is at the intermediate level. They never get into the advanced. They never drop to novice. Then they have flatlined right through intermediate low, and that's why the graphic over here on the rating shows a flat line. Okay, so they've maintained intermediate low, flat line all the way through. That's their end rating. But if they stay at intermediate for most part, and then they are showing some evidence of advance from time to time. So the student would, they have a rich variety of vocabulary on everyday or global issues, right? Versus personal, familiar, or everyday topics. But, that's something that we're going to see how well those two distinguish themselves when we actually hear the sample. But my guess would be that this student is using vocab on issues that are well outside of what we expect. Okay, they're talking about some news event and they're using some vocab in a way that we can converse about it at a basic level. Okay, maybe their sentences aren't, really well done. Maybe they're not speaking in paragraph form or whatever, but that would put them up here in these domains. But the they do have vocab that they have learned and that they can use in a conversation that have to do with that global issue that goes beyond familiar, school topics or whatever. Okay, like what my class schedule is or whatever. And then they do talk about past, present, and future. Right? So that student that's an example of where they're peaking into advanced, but for the most part still at intermediate. So they would score intermediate mid. And then this student here, we're gonna go back for a picture. And by the way, this PowerPoint, I emailed it to everyone, and it's also in the distribution folder if you want to go back. And then this student here, intermediate level, that's what they're showing us, but like we mentioned before, they can't talk about anything but their self. We push them, they're talking about their preferences, they're talking about their homework, what they're just talking about their self. And we push them to try to get them to talk about their family. Maybe they say their mom and dad, they have a certain number of brothers and sisters, so we push them a little bit further, and they can't tell us about their brothers and sisters. They can't tell us about their cousins, they can't tell us about anything else in their family. They say I like music, but they can't talk anything else about music. They can't tell us what they listen to or anything like that. Okay, so and the feedback to that student would be, here, what do you need to do to advance? You need to study vocab for these areas. You talked about this and your preferences for this and that. It's all about yourself. You need to be able to push beyond that. Okay, does that help? Okay, all right, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to give the mic back to Greg.
Okay, so we're going to do a similar activity as to what you just did with the writing. You're going to go back into your language groups again, but actually you're going to do this independently first. So independently, you're going to, this time you do have to go to the samples, and they're at this particular link, the goo.gl/I_D6U15. You can use your device or your laptop to go there. Sorry, the device won't work. You need to use a laptop. So if you don't have a laptop, you need to share it with someone. And because this is going to be speaking, if you have your earbuds, that would be great. We brought some extra headphones. So there are some that students have used that you can use. Or you could, as a group, perhaps go to a table and listen to the sample as a group. So we're going to give you an opportunity to get your earbuds or your headphones out. Headsets, If you have, you just found out that it does work with your device, you just have to download it.
It's not actually put it down, like,
All right, so again, you're not talking with your colleagues, even if you're listening together. You're going to rate it independently. So someone, if you're listening to it as a group, you're going to play it and everyone rate individually. And you're going to place your rating again on at this particular link at the bottom. Going to use your rubric, the speaking rubric, and you're going to capture some of that same information that you captured on the writing so that you can talk about it later with your colleagues. Okay, are we ready? Going to make sure you have the rubric out so that you can rate as you listen to the sample. And you're listening to sample 001 in the folder. All right? So there should be no talking, just listening, and then you're going to rate.
Okay, we're going to continue now. Yes, we're going to continue now, and we're going to do a round robin. So you should put your cell phones down. Let's see. In groups of 2 to 5 by language, I think everybody's in a language group already. I just want to go through the steps again. one person starts with the first domain, the function on this rubric, and you state what you rated it as, and then you explain what you saw or you heard in the sample that prompted you to rate it there. Okay, I don't know how easy it'd be to replay it, but if you could just say, this is what I heard when I listened to the sample. And then every other person shares the same thing, their rating for that domain and their rationale for it. This is my rating, this is why. Once everybody quickly goes around the table and says that, then there can be a little bit of discussion, but then you move to the next person who takes the next domain and does the same thing. So go by domain, go by domain, and let everybody say what their rating was and why. And then there could be a brief discussion on it, and then you move to the next domain.
Other things that we can do, like, school. I know where you
Okay, we're going to bring it back to the front again, and I think that for the most part, the work of that portion is done, right? Yeah? Anybody else just really working away at it? That's okay. I don't see anybody saying they are. Well, then we're going to move on. Any insights that you would like to share with the group? And you don't have to come to the mic, but I did get a message from the remote sites that they were like, tell them to speak up, we can't hear. So anybody that wants to share, come on up here and share. Yeah, it's okay. We're all friends. No problems here.
From Sharon Platek from Herndon, we were working with Spanish. I think the only feedback is that it would have been helpful to have a sample that was a little more robust, because the student really only produces 7 words, so there wasn't a lot of discussion that we could have. So that would be very helpful for our next session to have something that could lead to more.
Great comment. Yeah, that was me. Okay, I listened to 5 seconds of the sample. That was my bad. I should have listened to more of it, but good input. And next time I will listen to the whole sample.
Maybe that's saying that it was easier than the writing. Yeah, super easy to say.
So it was easier to rate. Do you feel like it would have been easier to rate even if it was longer? Yeah. So anybody want to comment on why they feel that way? Because I'm curious. Even if those who rated the Spanish, or perhaps those who rated both, is it easier to rate the speaking than the writing? Does anybody want to comment on that? Please come up here and I'll give you the mic and you can comment.
This particular sample was, because there's only 7 words in the speaking.
That's
right.
right.
The teacher asking more questions than the students. Good.
Right.
He did a lot of reading, but he got no response. So I don't know, he wasn't debatable.
Right. I see. Yeah. So maybe for the Spanish speakers, a little bit, Spanish teachers, a little at a disadvantage because they didn't have as long of a sample there. Might have to kind of like, imagine what it would be like. But yeah, I think the teacher did a great job also pushing the student. I mean, it was a great example of really pushing that. So from what I understand, the student was, teacher actually caught the student in the hallway, tracked the student down, caught the student in the hallway, and used the portable voice recorder to do the interview. I learned this after the fact, but very diligent teacher.
I just look at the 2 rubrics and I think the speaking rubric is much easier for me to process because it's more visual, it's far fewer words, and it's more straightforward. So I'm a visual learner, but even just looking at it, I don't have to sift through so many intricacies. So I like it better.
You're the only one that's gotten an applause so far today. All right. Any other thoughts on those? Hannah, did you have something to say?
I was basically going to say the same thing. I think the language is more simplistic, but still says enough to be able to delineate between the different levels. I think looking at it, you can quickly make judgments, which I think leads to the practicality of the usage. There's less to really argue over because I think the language is clearer and the distinctions are more distinct.
So we're talking about, come on. I'm not going to say anything. Chrissy's turn.
I have much of a voice right now, so please excuse me. We struggled with this rating just a bit because we felt that the interviewer actually didn't give the kiddo too much of an opportunity to demonstrate what he could say. So it was, where do you play, why do you play, when do you play? And if he was operating at, that would have been what, chapter 4, he should have had much more vocabulary that the teacher, the interviewer, could have led him to a better sample, we think. Spanish.
Like what?
Food, what they do in their free time. We just felt that he could.
Generalizing is better. They didn't need much.
But do you think on one topic only? So where do you play basketball? Why?
I didn't say much for her to go far with it, to be honest.
We just felt like we didn't give the opportunity. We felt as a group that the interviewer didn't give that kiddo an opportunity to demonstrate more vocabulary.
Good. I think we have a split decision here on Christy's comments, but I think the broader issue here that Christy brought up, which is a very good topic to think about and to debate, something that we're going to do really shortly, is we have to give the student, we have to have evidence that we've given them the opportunity, right, that every other student has. So there's certain factors that we have to meet, or I guess certain qualifications that we have to meet. And that is, we have to cover 2 topics, right? And there has to be enough evidence that we've pushed them to show that they've met their limit on those topics, okay? Now, these samples, some other of the languages would notice that some of these samples weren't interactive. I just worked with what we have, and we'll develop a database of more complete interactive samples. I don't think that this sample that we were talking about, Christy's commenting on, it's not like we're judging the teacher because the conditions there were not the ideal conditions. Wasn't even required for this teacher to administer a full interactive interview. So that's one reason why it wasn't a full interview. But that's where we're headed, right? We need to know what those components are of the full interview so that we can have them, so we don't skip them. And so, like we're talking, we do have a full interview and we have evidence that this is the student's best performance. Jimmy had a thought and then we'll move on.
I think the rubric is unique, that you can understand this easy. That way they can get feedback that is simple for students.
Great comment. So Jimmy's saying that the rubric is student friendly. Something a student looks at, understands, can use, can interpret really quickly, and use for their own goal setting and understanding of why their performance is rated at that level. All right, well, we're going to keep going here. I don't know if I should read some of these. There were a couple good comments from remote sites, but we'll move on. I don't have the time to really read them and figure out how to paraphrase them. So, but they're there, and I think they persist, so we can return to them. All right, that was round robin discussion. Now, the next thing we're going to do is talk about administering. Okay, we've just done the rating. Where did this sample come from? All right, it's easy to it's easier to rate the sample. It's another trick that we have to learn to elicit the sample. Right? How do we elicit it? That's what we've been talking about. So good segue here. This is the scaffolding device that was developed last year to help us all conduct this interview, this interpersonal speaking assessment in a uniform way. And I think most people have seen it before, but we're just going to look at it again because I'm sure that some people haven't. Anyway, it's divided into two major sections here. Well, let me take a step back. Let's look at the top row here. We have these steps, step 1 through 5. And step 1 is the warm-up. 2 is the development of the first topic. 3, after that, you develop another topic. After you've developed both topics, if needed, you do a role play. And then finally, you do the warm-up. That is the flow for the entire interview. Okay, so when we're talking about the teacher, did or didn't do this or that during the interview, it can be related to these different phases. Every interview will follow those 5 phases. And I can also show up here at the very top, it says English Teacher Interview Guide 3 times. So 3 times the topic of this interview guide. And we have 5 interview guides so far. And we can make as many as we need or want. But there are 5 right now. And this whole sheet right here has to do with 3 times. So the sheet the interview guide that's for, let's say, family, you have both those 3 times of family in your handout. That looks the same, but the questions are actually revolve around the topic of family. Okay, so the whole sheet looks the same. It has the flow across the top of the 5 steps. It has the major sections on the left and the right, teacher and student. But the questions themselves on the teacher portion relate to the topic listed at the top. Okay, as does the role play at the bottom. So here on the left-hand side, the major portion that we're concerned with are those questions that the teacher asks. And those questions are designed to elicit a particular type of speech, right? A particular level of discourse and function. Rebecca had a question. Yours doesn't look like that.
No.
What's the difference?
Like on the bottom, on the right, I just have paragraph, sentence, phrase, list, isolated word, and you have also.
Oh, you have checkboxes, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Article, is it the same?
It is the same. The difference is, since these were repeated, we went back and we made just one box with those. It's not necessary to clutter it up with repeats. So you'll notice that yours, the printout, is a newer version, and it's a little cleaner on this side as far as the number of checkboxes and how they're organized. Thanks, Rebecca. So the teacher questions on the left, what we got to keep in mind is that those are designed to elicit this type of speech. Okay, these questions up here are supposed to elicit an abstract discussion. Right? These questions here in this box, right at the intermediate level, are supposed to elicit speech where they're just creating and where it's at this sentence level. Okay, so they're designed to elicit particular functions and level of discourse. And on the right, that's what we see the student producing. Left-hand side, what the teacher does. On the right-hand side, we see what the student is producing. And then in the middle of everything, those 2 kind of like recycling symbols in blue, on PowerPoint they're in blue. That just indicates that the teacher should, depending on the student's type of response, adjust the question. So if the student is really struggling, we start at the intermediate level, start the interview, or whatever topic we head into, we start that topic at intermediate. And we ask that question there at the top, or something very similar to it. And the student just can't respond, and we rephrase, they can't respond, then we lower it down and we ask a yes-no question. Or we ask a question where it has a vocab item in there that they're going to recognize, perhaps a cognate, so that they can respond with something, okay? Because functioning at a novice level is still functioning. And we need proof of that they can do that. So we adjust our questioning so that we can find that proof that they're at that level, okay? So anyway, that's how the elicitation guide works. And the very bottom is the role play. And the only other comment I'll add about the elicitation guide is that it is a scaffold. You know, and down the road when teachers, you know, when we all feel very comfortable about what this process looks like, and we're comfortable with how to ask a question to elicit a particular type of speech, we don't have to always use the elicitation guide. If we can follow that model of proving that the student is at that level by asking the kind of questions that elicit that. Okay, so if there's a doubt as to whether or not you are ready to ask those kind of questions, then just use the elicitation guide. Okay. So before we go on and do a practice, and before we watch the model, here's some key terms. Well, I'll just take them one by one. These are key terms that we can't really use. We can't really rate a sample, and we can't administer the interpersonal speaking assessment without understanding these terms, have a working understanding of them. So the floor is the highest consistent level of performance. Okay? That's where they show the consistency, right? Their highest level of consistency. We'll show an example in a second. The ceiling is the highest peak. That's where the highest they can get as they peak in their production. The level check, those are questions that we ask 3 or 4 of them in a row. We feel like we know what the floor is, but we have to level check. Okay, so we ask 3 or 4 questions that target more language at that level within the same topic to get proof or sure that the student can actually perform at that level. The probe, that's where we consciously, after we've established the floor, we've level checked and know that's the floor, we consciously push them to the next level, choose questions that will force them to elicit speech at the next higher level. And then linguistic breakdown is a marked or very noticeable decline in their linguistic ability and their performance while they're being probed. Okay, while we're pushing.
So, for instance, is this going to be like a script for teacher, or like this question, or like, for instance, for topics? Like, for instance, you are doing something on free time, like, are those the only questions we can ask, or is it like a more detailed?
You can ask any, really, it's not a script.
Oh,
Okay, so it's not a script. It's not a start with question 1 and go down to question 10. The process is start asking questions at the intermediate level, find their floor, where are they consistent, where's the highest level they can perform consistently, then push them from there. But you have to do that within the same topic. Okay, once we find out for that topic, then we move on to the next topic and do the same thing for a few topics in a row.
So you have to topics.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, well, let's just talk about ceiling and floor real quick. We saw this pattern before with this rating, right? What is the floor and what is the ceiling on this pattern here? Ceiling and floor, we can speak in terms of these major levels here. So it is really straightforward. The floor and the ceiling are both intermediate levels. Okay? The highest consistent level of performance is intermediate, and the peak is also intermediate. Right? So when we're at the low level, low rating, the ceiling and the floor are the same. There's no difference. Okay. So there's a floor and there's a ceiling. Now here we have another pattern. What's the floor and the ceiling? Okay. Floor is intermediate and ceiling is in the advanced level. All right. Now this pattern, what is the floor here? Novice, and the ceiling is up here, intermediate. All right. Pretty straightforward. Okay, one last look at level check and probe here. Level check, remember, is questions at the level of the floor. Probe will push the student to perform at the next level. So let's pretend that this space here represents an assessment. Okay, and this, oh, that's not really very noticeable. There's a blue square and a green square above it. So let's just say that represents a question, right, at the intermediate level, because now it's a blue intermediate screen. So there's a question, another question, another question. What is the interviewer doing here? Level checking. All right. The interviewer believes this has evidence that the student is performing at intermediate. They're checking the level. So they ask 3 or 4 questions. They're satisfied that this student can perform at the intermediate level. And then what does the interviewer do? The interviewer has probed here, pushed to the next level, chose a question for the next section above on the elicitation guide that will force the student to speak at the next highest level. The questions are designed to do that. It kind of boxes the student in to force them to perform at the next level or to do their best at trying to do so. Rebecca had a question.
So if we don't have to stick directly to that, like let's say they get, I don't know, you want to talk about food, but you don't talk about free time. Do we, like, I'm assuming we can go with what they're doing, right? Because it's more about what can you produce, not necessarily, okay. So if we're
I think Rebecca's question is, what if the student begins to go off into a different topic?
you can go there, right?
Yeah, you can go to a different topic.
And then you just, so I think from novice level questions are like close-ended questions. You can't answer them with one word-ish. The national intermediate is more open-ended. And then advanced would be like more higher level.
That's a way of thinking of it, yeah.
And then everything is in the target language. So even if you're trying to do role play, do you have to give the instructions in the target language?
No, role play is introduced in English.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just tell them we're going to do a role play now, but once it starts, of course, we do the language. So good insights from Rebecca. Everybody's going to understand this in their own way or their own experience and understand it based on prior experience. So draw on whatever you can to understand it and begin using it. But like she was saying, if the student is going to start talking about another topic, and the one that we were on is just kind of like not going anywhere, we can pursue the next one. Right? Or we can say, no, you're always talking about that. We're going to stick to this topic and bring it back. I mean, it's up to us what we want to accomplish. Well, here's a probe, 3 probes, and then move back to intermediate. So that would be kind of a pattern to cover one topic. And then we would move to the next topic and do the same thing. Okay. Now, let's just say that line there represents the student performance. Okay, so the student is performing for the first 4 questions at the intermediate level. For the first probe, they show some evidence of the advanced level, maybe they, whatever it is, they show some evidence of it. And then with the second probe, they drop back down to intermediate. And the third probe, if we push them so far that they're not able to produce, complete sentences, for example. They just go back to words and phrases, and the vocab is just, or whatever, they're pausing a whole lot more. There's the marked drop in their production on the third probe. So what is that called? Linguistic breakdown. All right, so they broke it down linguistically. And then they come back to intermediate, they recover that meaning. And that's the point of the wind down, is just asking something that they can answer and help them. So we can just end on a productive note. So one thing to keep in mind is that when we do the rating, we see a pattern here, right? We see it straight through the green, up into the red, and then it drops back down into the blue. But because the blue was produced when we were consciously probing them, and we already established their level with level checks, we don't take that linguistic breakdown into account in the rating. Okay? So the pattern, what would this rating be? This would be intermediate, low, mid, or high. This is intermediate because there's a peak, right? We have evidence, solid evidence that they can show, produce language at the advanced level in some cases, just not across the board. So intermediate, mid. And what are the ceiling and floor here?
Oh, yeah.
Ceiling is advanced, and what's the floor? What's the definition of floor? The consistent level. Okay, we rule out linguistic breakdown that's caused by probing. Okay, so the floor is actually intermediate, and the ceiling is.
What happens when there is a linguistic breakdown that is not caused by probing? Then we take that into consideration.
That's what we see at the novice level a lot of times. Like we're pushing them and pushing them, but their speech stays at novice, right?
Okay.
You'll see this in the next the model interview that we're going to show right now. We'll put an interview on. You'll see the interviewer pushing the student throughout the whole interview. Student stays at novice, so the floor really is at the novice. The whole interview is linguistic breakdown. But if we're encountering linguistic breakdown, then we need to lower the floor, essentially. Okay. Yeah, alrighty. If we're not probing for it. Anyway, here we go. Let's watch this model. See if I can get it to play here. Okay, you may have seen this interview before. If you have, great. Go watch it again. If you haven't, it's a very good example of this process in 4 minutes. Beatrix also works in the office. She's elementary. We're looking at the process here. Pay close attention. You can turn to the last page of the packet, the handout, and that's the elicitation guide. Okay, the last 2 pages, front and back, are the elicitation guide. And follow along and try to, as you look at the elicitation guide, where are the questions at? Okay, she starts by talking about free time, and then she talks about family. So those are front and back on the elicitation guide. Can you see which question she's asking when she is trying to probe, when she's trying to push, when she drops back down when she drops back down, I won't tell you the level, I already did. And follow the process there, and then type of speech that the student is producing. Can you put little check marks on the elicitation guide and say, that's what the student produced, that's the function I just saw. That is the level of discourse I just saw, okay? And so look at the process here in terms of the elicitation guide.
Was machst du in deiner Freizeit? In deiner Freizeit, wenn du nicht in der Schule bist. Was machst du in deiner Freizeit?
Nein.
Nichts. Was machst du am Wochenende? Am Sonntag oder Samstag? Was machst du?
Fußball.
Fußball. Du spielst Fußball. Prima.
Ja, Fußball.
Fußball. Spielst du mit deiner Familie oder spielst du alleine?
Familie.
Ja. Oder spielst du auch auf einem Team?
Nein.
Nein, du spielst mit deiner Familie? Ja.
Ja.
Mit wem spielst du in deiner Familie?
Mit
wem?
Mit wem?
Mit deiner Frau?
Kinder.
Mit den Kindern. Ah ja, prima. Wie viele Kinder hast du? Mit wie vielen Kindern spielst du?
Drei.
3 Kinder?
Kinder.
Ja, du hast 3 Kinder. Wie heißen deine Kinder?
Wie heißen?
Was ist der Name von deinen Kindern?
Emily, Matthew, Sersha.
Und wie alt sind deine Kinder? Wie alt?
Wie alt?
Sind sie 5 Jahre? Sind sie 3 Jahre? Sind sie 2 Jahre? Wie alt? 15 Jahre?
Emily, Sersha, bei 2. Drei.
3. Sascha ist 3.
Sascha ist 3.
Ja.
Beautiful. Matthew. Beautiful.
6.
Newsweek, peace.
10. Ist er 10 Jahre alt oder ist er älter? Ist er 10 Jahre oder ist er älter als 10? Und was machst du mit deiner Familie noch? Ihr spielt Fußball. Was spielt ihr noch zusammen?
Noch zusammen.
Ja, was spielt ihr noch? Macht ihr Kochen gern? Macht ihr Musik zusammen?
Musik.
Ihr macht
Ja.
Musik zusammen? Ja.
Ja.
Prima. Was für Musik macht ihr? Macht ihr klassische
Klassik.
Musik oder macht klassische
Klassische Musik.
Musik? Ja, prima.
Pop.
Und auch Popmusik?
Pop.
Ja.
Ja.
Und was macht ihr noch für Musik? Oder hört ihr Musik? Spielt ihr ein Instrument?
Nein,
Kein Instrument.
Ja.
Radio?
Radio.
Ah, ihr macht Radiomusik.
Spotify.
Ja? Okay, danke, dass du gekommen bist heute und dass wir miteinander erzählen können.
Ja.
Also dann tschüss.
Tschüss.
All right, so that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, we like that one. Okay. Well, after watching that, before we move on to a practice of our own, were you able to see what did Beatrix do? Did she do anything that was surprising to you? She helped me. Is that legal? During an assessment to help them? Okay, what did her help do? I mean, for one, how did she help me? She used cognates, right? She lowered her questioning on that scale to allow me to produce novel speech, which includes yes, no's, and echoes. All right? That's what she did. She consciously did that. She would go back to kind of probe. Essentially, if someone's at my level for German, at some other level, if you're at that level, it all feels like the probe. Right? You're pushing. But she would push, but then she had to go back down each time. Okay? Back and forth here. So it didn't follow that really clean model of a check, then probe, back and forth all the time, but she was a probe, level check. And anyway, so yeah, she helped me out by lowering her questioning to allow me to produce novice level speech. Did it skew my rating? Did it give me a rating higher than I would have otherwise? No, it revealed my true level. And that's what we're doing here. We want to give every student the opportunity to prove to us that they are at that level. Okay? And afterwards we tell them what they can do to get to the next level. All right? So that was a great example of the probe level check. Beatrix feels like she spent too much time on it. But it was very effective and clearly demonstrated where I'm at with tournament. Now we have a comment here from Adam.
If I could just say something, that when I went to my certification, when I went to my certification for MOPI, and I did it a couple times, it's the most painful thing doing the novices, and it does take a lot of time. It's very painful, and it is a lot of that. And the majority of our students aren't going to be like they are. They're going to be a lot of those novices at first, and then as more and more as we kind of probably evolve our instruction, it will improve, I think.
Great insight. I did a mini OPI like this with my daughter when I drove her to school this morning. I was asking her about her classes. She's taking Spanish too. All right. Well, I'm going to give the mic to Gregory, and he's going to lead us through this next activity.
So now we're going to give you an opportunity to practice what you just saw, or practice with your colleagues. So Rudy is in the process of distributing some cards. And with those cards, we will have one you'll pair up. And one of the individuals will act as the teacher, and the other will act as the student. And the the student actually will receive the cards initially, and they will shuffle those cards, and then they will select one. And on those cards, the level of speech that we want you to produce when being probed by the teacher who is going to be using the elicitation guide to actually ask you those questions. The student will produce language at the level that's indicated on that card, and that card gives you some ideas of what types of structures you'll be producing. So the student is going to shuffle those cards. Don't start yet. I'm just giving you the instructions. You're going to all do English, because that's our mostly common language for everyone. And you're going to produce as the students. As you select the card, you will produce that level of language with regard to the actual performance proficiency guidelines. The teacher will probe and ask the various questions that they need and go through a number of topics, at least 2 topics. And the student is not to reveal the level of the language structure that you're working with. It's up to the teacher to figure that out after you've completed the whole process. So you want to pair with someone else. Doesn't matter who you pair with, you're all going to be using English. Don't start yet. You're going to decide who's going to be the teacher and who's going to be the student. And, okay, just a few more moments before you start talking. A few more moments. The teacher is going to take out the elicitation guide, and you're going to use that to actually help you through the interview process. Okay, now what questions might you have? All right, let's pair up. We're going to give you a few moments. Remember that when you're the teacher, remember you always start at the intermediate level for your initial questions. Okay? But actually, before you do that, you're going to do the brief warm-up. You're going to just be, hello, how are you today, that type of thing, to get the student comfortable. Then you're going to ask your intermediate level question, and then you're going to proceed with it. Okay, you may start. Don't forget to shuffle the cards.
You ought to switch now if you haven't yet. And if you've switched once, go ahead and switch again and do a third one. Or you can switch partners and practice with someone else. So we'll do one more practice, 4 or 5 more minutes. All right, go ahead and finish up whatever couple sentences or ideas you have. And we'll come back together for the last 10 minutes. Go ahead and finish the ideas you're working on right now. Another 20 or 30 seconds, and we'll come back together. Okay, back together now. So we can chat for a couple minutes. So how do you feel about the process of administering this interview? Do you feel, give me, I feel really good about this, all the way down to floor. How do you feel about this process? Some people say, here. Okay, so once the process is down, we can practice it in English. It transfers to the language that we're going to use. Right? I heard some really good interactions and good talking. Keep in mind that this is, for this kind of training, to get an OPI training, it's like 2 full days, 8 hours each day. We've been spending about a half hour on it right now. So if you feel like you understand it conceptually better than before, that's a great leap forward, I feel. And if you feel like you have internalized some of the mechanisms so that you can replicate them on your own and reproduce this, that's even better. So were you able to find the floor? Any comments on finding the floor, the ceiling? Any comments on level checks? Any comments on probes? Any comments on linguistic breakdown? Any comments on using the elicitation guide? Yes.
Can you explain? So we have a very good question about the phrase on the novice level and the phrase on the intermediate level.
It should be stricken from the intermediate level. Yeah, it's a typo. or we didn't realize. So on the rubric there under level of discourse, phrases is listed under intermediate level, and that's intermediate level is sentence level. Okay, so phrases doesn't belong on the intermediate level. Great input. Any other thoughts on the level checking and on finding the floor, establishing the floor, establishing the ceiling?
How successful were you with actually identifying the levels that the board seeking would be?
That's probably the more essential question. Were you able to find the level? Do you feel satisfied? Yeah, I nailed that, or I was close. Or any comments about that? Want to share? Hannah's got it.
Looking at the cards for novice 2 and intermediate 1, we had a really hard time distinguishing the two together. I was really trying hard to do what it said on novice 2, but felt myself sounding like an intermediate. It says on novice 2, use lots of discrete sentences, use some memorized phrases, only in present tense. And then on intermediate 1, it said form sentences, but use single sentence word answers only, use present tense only. So the distinction between those two is really fuzzy. And so she thought that I was intermediate. I really started to believe I was intermediate too, even though I was trying to do what it said on the card. But what it said on the card was kind of leading me into intermediate territory with those sentences.
I think this is good input if you want to take this back to your schools and CTs or departments to practice. These cards, you know, they're there to help the quote student portray something, right? And it's difficult to portray something that you're not, and so you may drift around. But we purposely didn't use, you know, the wording on those cards that would necessitate more understanding of actual standards and so forth, because we've used them with people that aren't world language people. Yeah, so you can take them back, but remember the card is just to help you have something, some kind of like concept of where you're going to be with your language ability. And it's not supposed to be tied to a particular level per se, like intermediate, mid, or low necessarily, but as long as you can kind of portray a particular, you know, level consistently as you can, it'll work. Any other comments on success in getting the ready? All right, well, we're going to continue with just a mention of a couple of things. Gregory mentioned it earlier. During summer curriculum development, by the way, that's where the speaking rubric comes from. It's the summer curriculum development team. But this URL is on the front cover of the handout that you got today. And if you access it, there are support materials in there, and they're divided into mainly these two sections here. How to introduce, I guess it's not these right here. Sorry. It does have to do with introducing students to the pilot, but it's materials and example videos and a timeline and a PowerPoint to kind of lay things out, explain the terminology that was written by teachers who attended MOBI and who collaborated during summer curriculum development. So that's in one of the folders. And then in the other folder, you'll find ready-made template lessons for a project that you can adapt to your students, and it's organized in there by level. And there's 2 per level, so you could have one for mid-year and one for end of year. So you could adapt these projects to provide something constructive and meaningful for your students to engage in while you're interviewing students. Okay, so that's why it's there. There's a folder with materials in it. You can access it, begin looking at it now, because I wanted to do this to get your attention. Because the most important thing that I wanted to say was we're going to administer this in November, right? After our November 3rd meeting, then the window opens to administer the interpersonal speaking. Not all the schools are doing that. Not all of them are on the second year of the pilot. But those that are, coming up in November. So the time to begin to plan how this is going to look in your classroom is now, right? And I wholeheartedly recommend not trying to do it in huge blocks, right? Don't try to do it in 2 straight or 3 straight blocks and take up a whole week. If you plan now, you can probably come up with using the materials here or others that you have, design a meaningful, engaging project for the students to work on, and divide it up so that you have, over a 2 or 3 week period, you do a certain number or a certain amount of time of interviewing in each class period and not spend the whole class period. And that'll be a lot easier on you and a lot easier on the student. So that's my recommendation now. Start looking at November. What's that going to look like? Talk to your CTs and figure that out. And then next workshop, like I said, here's November 3rd. It'll be a little shorter than this one. We're going to focus on being ready for that assessment. And did you have anything to add, Gregory?
Okay, again, as Rudy was saying, that folder that has all the resources is really designed to try to help you as you specifically work with the speaking assessment, to give you some ideas and activities that will be practical to allow your students to work independently, but in some meaningful activities, so that your kids are still involved with the curriculum. This final slide provides information that we're gathering from you before you leave. So there's 2 different things here. There's an exit ticket, where you'll first provide information regarding the exit ticket. There's 3 questions. And then also on that same link, you will need to go here to sign in so that we know that you attended and you can get credit. If you go to this link, the goo.gl/forms/ the rest of that long line, then you'll see the exit ticket, and you're actually giving us feedback for today's session, where you'll talk about, you identify the hits, the misses, and the things that we can tweak. Okay? And also there you will do the attendance piece. You'll see it there. And then the final portion, the next link will take you to a location where you can provide questions and comments that you might have with regard to this process that we went through today, or even questions and comments that you might have in the future as you do start the assessment process.
It's the idea. The idea was that
this one that's required would be more specific input, hits, misses, and tweaks about this workshop, right? The effectiveness of this workshop. This one over here for more general topics that you can access anytime, just a standing Dropbox.
That won't bring up this.
Yeah, they're separate.
Okay.
They're just standing.
That's just great. We are going to talk about this.
Remember that we'll still be hanging around if there are further questions that you might want to ask. But once you're finished, you're free to go. We thank you today for your participation, and hopefully this was beneficial in helping you to get to where we all want to go with regard to